The bitter wind howled across the plains, cutting through Isaac Blackburn's worn leather coat like it was made of paper as he stood before the freshly dug grave. Winter of 1876 had come early to Wyoming territory, and with it, a cold that had stolen everything that mattered. Isaac pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the blowing snow as the preacher's words were lost to the wind. The small wooden cross bearing his wife's name, Sarah Blackburn, beloved wife, seemed too fragile a thing to mark the passing of the woman who had been his world for 15 years. Pneumonia had taken her quickly, too quickly for the doctor from Laramie to make any difference. "Mr. Blackburn," the preacher said, touching his shoulder when the sparse gathering had dispersed, "you shouldn't be alone tonight. The offer to stay with my family still stands." Isaac shook his head, his voice rough from disuse. "Appreciate it, Reverend, but I need to get back to the ranch. Cattle won't feed themselves." The truth was, he couldn't bear the thought of kindness right now. Couldn't stomach sitting at another family's table, seeing a husband and wife exchange glances that spoke of a shared future he no longer had. The ride back to his homestead was punishing, the snowfall growing heavier with each passing mile. When he finally dismounted at his barn, his fingers were too numb to properly untack his horse. The house loomed dark and empty across the yard, no lantern burning in the window as there had been every night for 15 years. Inside, the fireplace held nothing but cold ashes. Isaac moved mechanically, striking a match to kindle new flames. The fire caught, but its warmth seemed to stop at his skin, unable to penetrate the ice that had formed around his heart. Sleep did not come that night nor the next. Isaac worked himself to exhaustion, feeding cattle, repairing fence lines damaged by the early storms, anything to keep moving, to stop thinking. But at night, in the empty bed with Sarah's pillow still bearing the faint scent of lavender water, the vastness of his loss engulfed him. 3 weeks after the funeral, a blizzard swept down from the mountains with a ferocity that hadn't been seen in these parts for a decade. Isaac had just finished securing the barn when he saw a wagon listing dangerously on the road that passed by his property, a lone figure struggling against the wind to control the panicked horses. Without thinking, he mounted his stallion and rode out, squinting against the stinging snow. As he drew closer, he realized the driver was a woman, her cloak whipping wildly around her as she fought to hold the reins. "Madam," he shouted above the wind, "you need to get those horses to shelter." The woman turned, revealing a face half hidden by a snow-dusted scarf. "Wheels broken." She called back, her voice nearly lost in the gale. Isaac assessed the situation quickly. The wagon was indeed damaged beyond quick repair, and night was falling. "My ranch is just over that rise. Let me help you." After securing her horses to his own mount, Isaac helped the woman climb onto his horse. They abandoned the wagon, marking its location with a tall branch stuck in the snow, and rode double back toward the safety of his homestead. Inside the relative quiet of his cabin, the woman unwound her scarf, revealing a face both beautiful and careworn. She was perhaps 30, with chestnut hair streaked prematurely with silver at the temples, and eyes the clear blue of a summer sky, eyes that had seen their share of hardship. "Beatrice Zimmerman," she said, extending a hand still trembling from cold. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Blackburn, Isaac Blackburn." He took her hand briefly, then turned away to stoke the fire. "Where were you headed in weather like this?" "Fort Collins," she replied, removing her sodden cloak. "I've purchased land there. My husband had family in the area." Isaac noted the past tense. Had Beatrice's eyes met his, and in them he recognized a familiar shadow. "James died last winter. Caught in a blizzard much like this one, trying to get medicine for our son who had taken ill." Her voice remained steady, though her hands still shook. By the time they found him, it was too late for both of them. The silence that followed held more understanding than anything Isaac had experienced since Sarah's passing. Here was someone who truly knew the particular cold that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the empty space beside you when you woke. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words inadequate but sincere. "My wife, 3 weeks ago, pneumonia." Beatrice nodded, requiring no further explanation. "The first year is the hardest," she offered simply. Isaac served a simple meal of beans and salt pork, apologizing for the lack of fresh food. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something about shared grief that eliminated the need for small talk. "You'll stay until the storm passes," Isaac said, making it more statement than question. "The spare room was my son's. He's grown and gone to California now. It's yours for as long as needed." "Thank you. I've got supplies in the wagon I'll need to retrieve when weather permits." Isaac nodded. "First thing when the storm breaks." That night, Isaac lay awake listening to the howling wind, acutely aware of another living soul under his roof for the first time since Sarah's death. There was guilt in the comfort that knowledge brought, but also the faintest stirring of something he'd thought frozen forever connection to another human being. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them in the small homestead. Initially awkward, they gradually fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Beatrice proved handy with a needle, mending shirts Isaac had set aside months ago. He split extra wood and taught her to play checkers in the evenings by the fire. On the third night, as they sat across from each other at the rough-hewn table, Beatrice spoke of James and their son Michael for the first time in detail, how James had courted her against her father's wishes, their struggles to make their small farm profitable, the joy Michael had brought into their lives. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel warm again," she admitted, staring into the flames. "Not just physically, but inside, as if something fundamental has changed in how my body works." Isaac nodded slowly, "Like your blood's running colder. Exactly that. Does it get better?" He asked after a long pause, the question he'd been unable to ask anyone else. Beatrice met his gaze directly. "Not better. Different. You build a life around the cold, learn to live with it." When the storm finally broke on the fourth morning, they rode out together to salvage what they could from her wagon. Most of her possessions had survived, protected by oiled canvas, though the wagon itself was beyond repair. "I can take you to Laramie when the trail's clear," Isaac offered as they loaded her trunks onto his sled. "You can catch the stage to Fort Collins from there." Beatrice nodded, though there was reluctance in her expression. "I suppose that would be best. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's no imposition," Isaac said quickly, surprising himself with his sincerity. "It's been good not to be alone." The week that followed saw the worst of winter's grip relaxing incrementally. Each morning, Isaac expected Beatrice to press for departure, but she seemed content to remain, helping with chores and bringing a semblance of order back to a household that had been neglected in grief. One evening, as they sat companionably by the fire, Isaac found himself speaking of Sarah, how they'd met when he was just a hot-headed cowhand with dreams of his own spread. How she'd believed in those dreams enough to marry him with nothing but promises to her name. "She was the strongest woman I ever knew," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Built this place alongside me, log by log. When Thomas was born, she was back to work the next day, baby strapped to her back." He smiled faintly at the memory. "I always thought she'd outlive me." "That's how I felt about James," Beatrice replied softly. "He seemed indestructible when they brought him back." She faltered. Without thinking, Isaac reached across and covered her hand with his own. The touch, the first deliberate contact between them, sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. Beatrice didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm up, her fingers curling around his. They sat like that, connected in the firelight, neither speaking nor needing to. The next morning brought clear skies and reports from a passing neighbor that the road to Laramie would be passable within days. The news should have been welcome, but it settled like a weight in Isaac's stomach. "I've been thinking," he said, as they finished breakfast, carefully casual. "No sense rushing to Fort Collins with spring planting months away if you wanted to wait out the worst of winter." Beatrice set down her coffee cup slowly. "Are you asking me to stay, Mr. Blackburn?" "Isaac," he corrected, then met her eyes directly. "And yes, I suppose I am." "As a guest, of course," he added hastily. "The house is large enough, it would be the sensible thing." "The sensible thing," she echoed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Is that the only reason?" Isaac's face warmed. "No," he admitted, "it's not just that." "Good," Beatrice said simply. Because I'd like to stay, and not just because it's sensible. That night, Isaac moved Sarah's things from the dresser they'd shared, carefully packing away her clothing, her hairbrush, the small bottle of perfume he'd brought her from Denver. There were tears, but not the devastating kind that had plagued him for weeks. These felt cleansing somehow, like spring rain. Beatrice remained at the homestead as January yielded to February, and they settled into a companionship that grew more natural by the day. She never attempted to take Sarah's place, maintaining her separate room and respecting the rhythms of the household that had been established long before her arrival. Yet her presence changed everything, brought color back to a world that had faded to gray. In the evenings, she read aloud from one of the few books in the house, her voice bringing to life tales of far-off places that made the isolated cabin feel less remote. During the days, they worked together, preparing for the eventual thaw that would bring the demanding season of spring. One clear February afternoon, Isaac was teaching Beatrice to shoot, setting up cans along the fence line. She proved a quick study, her aim surprisingly accurate for a beginner. "My father would faint dead away if he could see this," she laughed after hitting her target. "He believed a lady should never touch firearms. What does he think of your move out west then?" Isaac asked, reloading the rifle. Beatrice's smile faded slightly. "He doesn't approve. After James died, he wanted me to return to Philadelphia, to the life I had before." She sighted along the barrel. "But I can't go backwards. That girl doesn't exist anymore." Isaac understood completely. "The first time I rode into town after Sarah passed, Mrs. Henderson from the general store said how sorry she was, then told me her niece was coming to visit such a lovely young woman, as if Sarah could be replaced, just like that." Beatrice lowered the rifle without firing. "People mean well, but unless they've walked this path." "They don't understand," Isaac finished. Their eyes met in perfect comprehension. Later that evening, as they sat before the fire, Beatrice mending a torn shirt while Isaac cleaned his tack, she asked quietly, "Do you think they would mind?" "Sarah and James," Isaac's hands stilled. "Mind what?" "That we find comfort in each other's company." He considered this seriously. "Sarah always said life was for the living. She wouldn't begrudge anyone finding peace." He looked up at Beatrice. "Would James?" "No," she said with certainty. "He would want me to be happy, however that came about." The conversation marked a subtle shift between them. Nothing overtly changed, yet everything felt different, possibilities opening where before there had been only closed doors. March arrived with the first tentative signs of spring, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, longer daylight hours, the occasional birdsong breaking the winter silence. With the changing season came increasing urgency about Beatrice's plans. "The stage to Fort Collins runs regular now," Isaac mentioned one morning as they tended to the horses. "If you're still set on going." Beatrice brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "I've been thinking about that land I purchased. I don't even know if it's suitable for farming." "It was James's dream more than mine." "What was your dream?" Isaac asked, genuinely curious. She paused, seeming surprised by the question. "I always wanted a small shop, books perhaps, or dry goods, something of my own." "Laramie could use a proper bookshop," Isaac said casually, then busied himself with the horses, afraid to look at her, afraid she might read too much in his expression, or worse, not enough. That evening they rode to the ridge overlooking the valley where Isaac's ranch sprawled. The sunset painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, the distant mountains purple against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, taking in the view. This was Sarah's favorite spot, Isaac said, surprising himself with how easily he could speak her name now. "We used to ride up here when decisions needed making." He turned to Beatrice. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "As have I," she replied. "I know we haven't known each other long, nearly 3 months," she interjected. "Not long enough by most folks' reckoning," Isaac acknowledged. "But I feel like we've known each other forever and just met at the same time. Does that make any sense?" Beatrice nodded. "Perfect sense." Isaac took a deep breath. "I'm not asking to replace what you had with James, just as I know you wouldn't try to take Sarah's place, but I think, maybe, we could build something new, together." "Are you proposing, Isaac Blackburn?" Beatrice asked, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed emotion. Inelegantly, but yes, he admitted. Not right away, we could court proper if you'd like. But I wanted you to know my intentions before you made any decisions about Fort Collins. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the valley. I've been carrying this cold inside me for so long, she said finally. I thought it was permanent, but lately I've felt warmth again. She turned to him, her eyes bright. I don't need courting, Isaac, I know my own mind. It was answer enough. Isaac reached for her hand, and as their fingers intertwined, he felt something inside him thaw completely. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Laramie, with Reverend Porter officiating and only a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, with a spray of early wildflowers in her hair. Isaac, clean-shaven for the occasion, stood tall in his best shirt and string tie, looking at his bride with undisguised wonder. Never thought I'd be doing this again, he whispered as they exchanged rings. Life has its own plans, Beatrice replied. The homestead transformed with Beatrice as its mistress. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare for years. The vegetable garden expanded, promising summer bounty. Most significantly, the spare room became truly theirs, a fresh start unmarked by the past. Spring brought lambing season and the round-the-clock work that accompanied it. Beatrice proved herself as capable in the barn as in the house, rolling up her sleeves to assist with difficult births and bottle-feeding orphaned lambs. You're a natural, Isaac commented one evening as they returned from the barn, tired but satisfied with a day's work well done. I grew up in the city, but I was never meant for it, Beatrice admitted. I feel more myself here than I ever did in Philadelphia. As April turned to May, they rode into Laramie for supplies and mail. Among the letters was one addressed to Beatrice, bearing a Philadelphia postmark. My father, she explained, recognizing the handwriting. She opened it with trepidation, reading quickly. He's coming west. Says he needs to assess my situation. Isaac frowned. Your situation seems perfectly clear to me. Father has difficulty accepting when things don't go according to his plans, Beatrice said, tucking the letter away. And I was decidedly not in his plans for me. The news cast a shadow over the ride home, though Isaac tried to reassure her. He's your father. Once he sees you're happy, he'll come around. Beatrice didn't look convinced. You don't know him. Harold Zimmerman arrived in Laramie 2 weeks later, a distinguished figure in city clothes distinctly out of place against the frontier backdrop. Isaac met him at the stage station, extending a hand that was examined with barely concealed disdain before being briefly shaken. Mr. Zimmerman, welcome to Wyoming. Beatrice is eager to see you. The older man's stern expression didn't soften at the mention of his daughter. I presume you're the cowboy who saw fit to marry my daughter without so much as requesting my blessing. Isaac bit back a sharp retort. Sir, with respect, Beatrice is a grown woman who's been widowed and made her own way. She didn't need permission. Harold's eyes narrowed. She's also the sole heir to a considerable fortune, which I'm sure didn't escape your notice. The accusation stung, especially because it was the first Isaac had heard of any fortune. I think we should continue this conversation at the ranch. It's a fair ride. The journey passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only when they crested the final rise and the homestead came into view. The modest cabin and outbuildings were neat and well-maintained, but clearly a working ranch, not a gentleman's estate. This is where you've brought my daughter, Harold asked, disbelief evident in his tone. This is the home Beatrice and I share, Isaac corrected firmly. It may not be Philadelphia, but it's honest and it's ours. Beatrice was waiting on the porch, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. When she saw her father, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture Isaac now recognized as her preparing for battle. Father, she greeted, allowing him to kiss her cheek. Harold looked her over critically. You've lost weight, and your hands, he took her fingers, examining the calluses there. What have you been reduced to? Work, Beatrice replied simply. Meaningful work that I choose to do. The reunion did not improve over dinner, despite Beatrice's efforts to prepare her father's favorite dishes. Harold alternated between pointed questions about Isaac's finances and thinly veiled suggestions that Beatrice return east. The Harringtons still ask after you, he mentioned casually. Edward never married, you know. I'm already married, father, Beatrice reminded him, reaching for Isaac's hand across the table. Harold ignored the gesture. Arrangements can be made. A marriage of such short duration to a man of Mr. Blackburn's standing could easily be annulled. Isaac's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Beatrice stood abruptly. That's enough. I love my husband and I have chosen this life. You're welcome in our home as my father, but not as my keeper. You cannot possibly understand what you're giving up, Harold exclaimed. The comfort, the security, I have both, Beatrice interrupted. And happiness besides. Harold stayed 3 tense days, during which Isaac made every effort to demonstrate the viability of their operation and the sincerity of his feelings for Beatrice. The older man remained unmoved, viewing everything through the lens of his own prejudice. On the morning of his departure, as they prepared to take him back to town for the eastbound stage, Harold made one final attempt. I've had my lawyer draw up papers, he told Beatrice, producing an envelope. A trust fund in your name only. You needn't live like this, reliant on the vagaries of weather and cattle prices. Beatrice didn't touch the envelope. The money was never what mattered to me, father. Why can't you see that? Because I raised you for better than this. Harold gestured around them. You were educated at the finest schools presented to society, and I was miserable, Beatrice cut in. With James and now with Isaac, I have found purpose and love. That's worth more than any trust fund. Harold's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice. Consider yourself disinherited. Isaac had heard enough. Mr. Zimmerman, with all due respect, your daughter doesn't need your money. What she needs, what she deserves, is your acceptance of the life she's chosen. The fact that you can't see her happiness right in front of you speaks more to your blindness than her choices. The older man stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to Beatrice. When you come to your senses, you know where to find me. With that, he climbed into the wagon without assistance, his back rigid with disapproval. The ride to town was conducted in cold silence. After helping Harold board the stage, Isaac watched it pull away with mixed feelings, relief at the man's departure, but sadness for Beatrice's sake. She was quiet on the return journey, her expression distant. I'm sorry, Isaac said finally. I shouldn't have spoken to your father that way. No, you were right, Beatrice replied. He's never been able to see beyond what he wants for me, she sighed deeply. Still, he's my father. I had hoped. Isaac reached across to take her hand. He may come around yet, given time. Beatrice squeezed his fingers gratefully. Perhaps, but even if he doesn't, I've made my choice and it's the right one. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Beatrice nestled against his side. Isaac was struck by how profoundly his life had changed in just 6 months. The crushing grief that had once seemed insurmountable hadn't disappeared. He still thought of Sarah daily, still missed her, but alongside it now existed joy and hope, and a future he could look toward with anticipation rather than dread. What are you thinking about? Beatrice murmured sleepily. How lucky I am, he replied honestly, to have found you. We found each other, she corrected, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. 2 people who knew the cold, creating warmth together. Summer brought long days of hard work and the sweet pleasure of building a life together. They expanded the vegetable garden, repainted the cabin, and began construction on a new room that might someday house a child, a possibility they had begun to discuss in quiet evening conversations. In July, they received an unexpected letter from Thomas, Isaac's son in California. He was married now with a baby on the way and wrote that he'd like to visit and introduce his new family. Are you nervous about meeting him? Isaac asked Beatrice after sharing the news. A little, she admitted. I don't want him to think I'm trying to replace his mother. He'll love you for who you are, Isaac assured her. Just as I do. August found them preparing for Thomas's arrival, making repairs and improvements to the homestead that had long been deferred. Beatrice took particular care with the guest room, sewing fresh curtains and a new quilt. What if he resents me? She asked one evening, the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. For taking Sarah's place, Isaac set down the harness he was mending. Sarah will always be Thomas's mother. Nothing changes that, but he's a grown man now with a family of his own. He understands that life goes on. He moved to sit beside her. Besides, you haven't taken anyone's place, you've made your own. The day before Thomas was due to arrive, they rode into Laramie for supplies. The town had grown considerably in recent years, with new businesses springing up along the main street. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago," Isaac mentioned as they passed an empty storefront. "About wanting your own shop." Beatrice looked at him curiously. "What brought that to mind?" "This building's for lease," he nodded toward it. "Good location. Town could use a bookshop like I said before." "Isaac Blackburn, are you suggesting I go into business?" Beatrice asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Why not? We could manage it together." "I know cattle, but I'm a quick study." Beatrice regarded the storefront thoughtfully. "It's a lovely idea, but the timing, with a baby possibly in our future." "Just something to consider," Isaac said. "No rush to decide." Thomas arrived the following day, stepping down from the stage with a pretty dark-haired woman whose advanced pregnancy was evident beneath her traveling dress. Isaac embraced his son fiercely, then shook hands with his daughter-in-law, Catherine. "Pa, you look well," Thomas said, studying his father with evident relief. "When I got your letter about the wedding, I wasn't sure what to expect." "Happiness agrees with him," Beatrice said, stepping forward to meet her stepson. Thomas regarded her with open curiosity. "Mrs. Blackburn." "It's good to finally meet you." "Beatrice, please," she insisted, then turned to Catherine. "You must be exhausted from the journey. Let's get you somewhere you can rest." The visit proved easier than anticipated. Thomas, after an initial reserve, warmed quickly to Beatrice, particularly when he observed the obvious affection between her and his father. Catherine, far from home and approaching motherhood, formed an immediate bond with her mother-in-law. On their third evening, after the women had retired early, Thomas and Isaac sat on the porch sharing a rare glass of whiskey. "I wasn't sure how I'd feel seeing someone else in Mom's home," Thomas admitted. "But Beatrice, she's good for you, Pa. Better than I deserve," Isaac agreed. "Mom would approve," Thomas said quietly. "She always said she never wanted you to be alone." Isaac's throat tightened with emotion. "I miss her every day." "We all do," Thomas replied, "but that doesn't mean we stop living." He glanced toward the house. "I'm glad you found someone who understands that." The next morning, a commotion from the guest room brought everyone running. Catherine had gone into labor a month earlier than expected. "The baby's coming now?" Thomas asked, panic evident in his voice. "But we're miles from a doctor." "Babies don't always wait for doctors," Beatrice said calmly, taking charge. "Isaac, heat water. Thomas, fetch clean linens from the trunk in our room." For the next 12 hours, Beatrice stayed at Catherine's side, coaching her through the waves of pain with a steady presence. Isaac and Thomas took turns keeping watch outside the door, pacing anxiously. Just after sunset, a thin cry broke the tension. Thomas bolted upright from where he'd been sitting with his head in his hands. "Is that—" Beatrice appeared in the doorway, her face tired but radiant. "Come meet your daughter. She's small but strong." Inside, Catherine reclined against pillows, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Thomas entered, her exhaustion giving way to joy. "Isn't she perfect?" she whispered. Thomas approached cautiously, awestruck by the miniature features of his child. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice breaking. "Just like her mother." Isaac hung back, watching the tableau of his growing family with a fullness in his heart he hadn't thought possible again. Beatrice came to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Sarah Elizabeth," Catherine announced, after both her grandmothers. Isaac felt tears spring to his eyes at the unexpected honor. Beside him, Beatrice squeezed his hand in understanding. Later that night, when the new family was settled and the house quiet once more, Isaac found Beatrice on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "You were amazing today," he told her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How did you know what to do?" "I helped birth plenty of babies back in Philadelphia," she explained. "The women in my father's factory, they couldn't afford doctors." Isaac shook his head in wonder. "You never cease to surprise me." Beatrice turned in his embrace, her expression serious. Isaac, seeing Thomas with his daughter today, she hesitated. "Do you think we might still have that chance to have a child of our own?" "I'd like nothing more," he said honestly. "A little girl with your eyes or a boy with your spirit." "Or both," Beatrice suggested, a smile spreading across her face. I've always wanted a large family. Isaac laughed, pulling her closer. Best get started then. Thomas, Catherine, and baby Sarah stayed through September while the infant gained strength for the journey home. During those weeks, the cabin was filled with the peaceful chaos of family life, midnight feedings, lullabies, the endless wonder of new parents discovering their child. For Isaac, watching his son embrace fatherhood healed something long broken. For Beatrice, the experience of helping care for the infant awoke a maternal longing that grew stronger by the day. When the time came for the young family to depart, promises were made for future visits. Next time you'll come to California, Thomas insisted. Little Sarah needs to know her grandparents. Grandparents, Isaac repeated, testing the word, makes me sound ancient. Distinguished, Beatrice corrected, kissing his cheek. Very distinguished. After they were gone, the house felt strangely empty, though not in the desolate way Isaac had experienced after Sarah's death. This emptiness held possibility, anticipation. I've been thinking about that shop in town, Beatrice said one evening as they sat before the fire. Perhaps we should look into it for the winter months when the ranch needs less attention. Isaac looked up in surprise. You're serious? Why not? It would give us a foothold in town for when we're older, and I've always loved books. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. We could start small books, paper goods, perhaps some specialty items from back east. Blackburn's books, Isaac mused, has a nice ring to it. Blackburn and Blackburn, Beatrice countered, equal partners. October brought the cattle drive, the arduous process of moving the herd to lower pastures before winter set in. Beatrice insisted on joining, despite Isaac's initial reluctance. I've never done a drive before, she argued. How will I learn if you don't teach me? It's dangerous, Isaac protested. Long hours in the saddle, unpredictable weather, skittish cattle. All the more reason to have an extra hand, Beatrice reasoned. Besides, I'm an excellent rider. In the end, he relented, and she proved her worth many times over during the 5-day journey. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of the boss's city-bred wife, came to respect her determination and quick learning. On the final night of the drive, camped under a canopy of stars with the cattle settled nearby, one of the older hands approached where Isaac and Beatrice sat by the fire. Mrs. Blackburn, he said, tipping his hat, reckon I owe you an apology. Thought you'd be more hindrance than help, but you pulled your weight and then some. Beatrice accepted with grace. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Coming from you, that means a great deal. After he'd moved away, Isaac squeezed her hand. You've won them over completely. Took me years to earn that kind of respect from Jenkins. I had a good teacher, she replied, leaning against his shoulder, and I'm a fast learner. The leased storefront in Laramie became theirs in November. They spent weeks cleaning, painting, and installing shelves, working together in the evenings after ranch chores were complete. Beatrice wrote to publishers in Denver, St. Louis, and Chicago, establishing accounts and ordering initial stock. It won't be a grand emporium, she cautioned as they arranged the first shipment of books on freshly built shelves, but it will be the only dedicated bookshop between Cheyenne and Salt Lake City. It's exactly right, Isaac assured her, watching her arrange volumes with loving care. Just like everything else you've touched in my life. Blackburn and Blackburn Books opened its doors the first week of December, just in time for Christmas shoppers. The response exceeded their expectations, with curious townspeople and weary travelers alike drawn to the warm, welcoming space with its carefully curated selection. Beatrice thrived in the role of shopkeeper, her natural charm and genuine interest in people making customers into friends. Isaac, though less comfortable with commerce than cattle, found satisfaction in building bookshelves and display cases, each one improving on the last as he refined his woodworking skills. They alternated days at the shop, ensuring the ranch was never neglected. It was a demanding schedule, but the shared purpose energized them both. One snowy afternoon, as Beatrice was closing the shop early due to the weather, the door opened to admit a distinguished older gentleman she didn't immediately recognize. "I'm afraid we're closing, sir," she began, then froze as the man removed his hat. Father, Harold Zimmerman stood awkwardly in the doorway, snow-dusting his expensive coat. Beatrice, he acknowledged, your shop is charming. What are you doing here? She asked, too shocked for pleasantries. I received your letter about Thomas's baby, he replied. It made me realize, well, that I'm not getting any younger and I have no other family. Beatrice approached cautiously. You've come all this way to tell me that. Harold looked around the shop, taking in the details of what his daughter had created. I've come to see if there might still be room in your life for a foolish old man who took too long to understand what matters. The walls Beatrice had built against further hurt from her father began to crumble. There's always been room, she said softly. You're the one who closed the door. Then I hope it's not too late to open it again, Harold replied, his usual confidence replaced by genuine uncertainty. That evening, Harold joined them for dinner at the ranch. The conversation was stilted at first, years of estrangement creating a chasm not easily bridged. But as the meal progressed, genuine effort on all sides slowly thawed the atmosphere. Your home is more substantial than I initially gave it credit for, Harold admitted, looking around the cabin with fresh eyes. And the shop. It's impressive what you've accomplished in such a short time. Beatrice has a gift for business, Isaac said, his earlier animosity softened by the older man's evident attempt at reconciliation. The shop was her vision entirely. Harold nodded thoughtfully. She gets that from her mother. Elizabeth could see potential where others saw only what already existed. He turned to his daughter. You remind me of her more each time I see you. It was the highest compliment he could have paid, and Beatrice's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. Harold stayed through Christmas, gradually fitting himself into the rhythms of their life. He even rolled up his sleeves to help with ranch chores, earning grudging respect from the hands who had expected a soft city gentleman. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire after a simple but festive dinner, Harold cleared his throat. I have something for you both, he said, producing an envelope from his jacket. Consider it a belated wedding present. Beatrice opened it cautiously, then gasped at the document inside. Father, this is the deed to the shop building. And the apartment above it, Harold confirmed. I purchased it from the previous owner, no sense paying rent when you could be building equity. Isaac stared at his father-in-law in disbelief. That's too generous a gift. Consider it an investment in the family business, Harold replied. With one condition. Beatrice tensed. What condition? That you'll consider expanding. There's space for a proper children's section. Harold's expression softened. For my future grandchildren to enjoy. The new year brought fresh promise. With Harold's blessing and financial backing, Blackburn & Blackburn expanded its inventory and reach. The apartment above the shop was renovated into comfortable quarters for overnight stays during bad weather or busy seasons in town. In February, exactly 1 year after they had first met, Isaac took Beatrice back to the ridge overlooking the valley. Hard to believe it's been only a year, he said as they dismounted. Feels like I've known you forever. And yet, like we're just beginning, Beatrice added, taking his hand. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold reminiscent of that first sunset they'd shared. Isaac pulled her close, their breath mingling in the cold air. I have something to tell you, Beatrice said, her eyes shining with a secret joy. Something I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain of before I said anything. Isaac's heart quickened. What is it? We're going to have a baby, she said, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. In late summer, the doctor thinks. Isaac stood speechless, overwhelmed by emotion. Finally, he managed, Are you certain? As certain as can be, Beatrice confirmed. Are you happy? In answer, he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace. Happier than I ever thought possible, he said when he set her down. When I lost Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never know family joy again. He pressed his forehead to hers. You've given me back a future I thought was lost forever. We've given each other that gift, Beatrice corrected. Two people who knew a terrible cold, finding warmth together. As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun at their backs, Isaac reflected on the strange, winding paths that had brought them to this moment. The bitter losses that had seemed unbearable at the time had somehow led to this new happiness, not replacing what was lost, but building something different and equally precious from the ashes. That night, as Beatrice slept beside him, one hand resting protectively over her belly where their child grew, Isaac offered silent gratitude to Sarah. For the years they'd shared, for the son they'd raised together, and for somehow guiding him through the darkness to this unexpected second chance. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, all was warmth and promise. The cold they had both known so intimately had not vanished entirely. It never would, but they had learned to build a life around it, and in doing so, had discovered a deeper kind of heat that even the harshest winter could not extinguish. Summer arrived with blazing heat that made Beatrice's advancing pregnancy increasingly uncomfortable. Isaac insisted she spend the hottest days in town, where the stone building that housed their shop stayed cooler than the ranch house. Harold, who had returned for an extended visit in anticipation of his grandchild's birth, often kept her company there, surprising everyone with his aptitude for bookselling. "Who would have thought," Beatrice remarked to Isaac one evening as they prepared for bed, "that my father would find satisfaction in discussing dime novels with cowboys and recommending poetry to schoolteachers?" "People can surprise you," Isaac replied, helping her ease onto the mattress, her movements now cumbersome with the weight of their child. "If anyone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be running a bookshop alongside ranching, I'd have laughed them off my property." Beatrice smiled, placing his hand on her rounded belly where the baby kicked energetically. "And now I can't imagine any other life," he said simply. The baby arrived in early August after a labor that lasted from sunset to sunrise. Unlike Catherine's early delivery, everything progressed normally, though the hours seemed endless to Isaac as he paced outside their bedroom, barred from entry by the midwife. When the first lusty cry pierced the dawn, Isaac froze mid-step, his heart pounding. Moments later, the door opened to reveal the midwife's tired but smiling face. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackburn. You have a son. Mother and baby are doing just fine." Inside, Beatrice looked exhausted but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in the blanket she had spent months knitting. She looked up as Isaac approached, her eyes filled with triumphant joy. "Meet your son," she said, folding back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "James Harold Blackburn." Isaac sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overcome with emotion as he took in the tiny features of his son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's impossibly small fingers, "just like his mother." "Would you like to hold him?" Beatrice asked. With reverent care, Isaac took his son into his arms. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but seemingly looking straight into his father's soul, then closed again in contented sleep. "Hello, little one," Isaac murmured. "We've been waiting for you." Harold, who had been keeping vigil alongside Isaac, was invited in to meet his grandson. The older man's usual composure faltered at the sight of the baby named partly for him. "He's a fine boy," Harold said gruffly, blinking rapidly. "Strong like his parents." Life reorganized itself around the newest Blackburn. The ranch hands, many of whom had children of their own, brought handmade toys and offered gruff congratulations. Neighbors arrived with meals and practical gifts. Letters of celebration came from Thomas and Catherine in California, promising a visit as soon as travel with their own toddler was manageable. Through it all, Isaac watched in wonder as Beatrice navigated motherhood with the same determined grace she brought to everything. When she grew frustrated with middle-of-the-night feedings or the temporary confinement of recovery, he reminded her that she wasn't alone, taking the baby for hours so she could rest. "You're a natural father," Beatrice observed one afternoon, finding Isaac in the rocking chair on the porch, baby James asleep on his chest while he reviewed the ranch accounts one-handed. "Had some practice with Thomas," Isaac replied, though in truth, he'd been a younger, more impatient man then, less involved in the daily care of an infant. "Besides, he makes it easy. Look at that face-perfect contentment." By the time autumn painted the landscape in reds and golds, baby James had settled into a predictable rhythm. allowing Beatrice to gradually resume some of her responsibilities at the shop. Harold, who had extended his stay indefinitely, proved an unexpectedly willing grandfather, often watching the baby while Beatrice attended to business. "Who would have thought?" Isaac remarked one evening as they observed Harold reading solemnly to the 3-month-old from a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare, "that the man who once threatened to disinherit you would become our built-in nursemaid." "People reveal their true selves when confronted with a baby," Beatrice replied. All that grandeur and ambition stripped away by 10 tiny fingers and a toothless smile. As winter approached again, they marked the 2nd anniversary of Sarah's death with a quiet visit to her grave. Isaac brought wildflowers the last of the season, while Beatrice carried baby James bundled against the November chill. "I thought this would be harder," Isaac admitted as they stood before the simple marker. "But it feels right to bring him here. To acknowledge where our family began and how it's grown," Beatrice nodded, understanding completely. "James and Sarah are part of who we are, they always will be." That evening, as they sat before the fire with their sleeping son in his cradle nearby, Beatrice broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about the future," she began, "about the shop and the ranch and how to balance it all." Isaac set aside the bridle he was mending. "What's on your mind?" "I think we should build a proper house in town above or behind the shop," she said. "Not to abandon the ranch, but to have a real second home for when we're there, especially as James grows and eventually needs schooling." "You've given this some thought," Isaac observed. "I have, and I think we could manage both places with the right help." She leaned forward, enthusiasm building. "The ranch hands are trustworthy. Jenkins could take on more responsibility with the right compensation. And in town, we could expand the shop, perhaps add stationery supplies, even a small lending library." Isaac smiled at her excitement. "You miss the daily business of the shop." "I do," she admitted. "I love our life here, but I also love what we've built in town. Is it selfish to want both?" "Not selfish," Isaac assured her. "Practical, the ranch will always be our foundation, but the shop is our future, a legacy for James that doesn't depend on weather or cattle prices." He took her hand. "I think it's a fine idea." The following spring saw their plans take shape. Construction began on a modest but comfortable residence behind the shop, designed to accommodate their growing family and Harold, who had officially moved west permanently. "Philadelphia holds nothing for me now," the older man declared when he sold his mansion there. "My family is here." The shop expanded into the adjacent storefront when it became available, allowing for the addition of a dedicated children's section and the art supplies Beatrice had wanted to stock. Isaac discovered an unexpected talent for woodworking, crafting custom bookshelves, and display cases that became features customers specifically admired. Thomas and Catherine visited that summer with their daughter, now a lively toddler, and were delighted to find baby James sitting up and reaching for everything within grasp. The cousins, though too young for real play, seemed fascinated by each other, creating a chaotic but joyful household. "We should do this every summer," Thomas suggested as the visit neared its end. "Alternate years, one in California, one here." "I'd like that," Isaac agreed, watching his son and grandson together with profound satisfaction. Family traditions are important. As James grew from baby to toddler, the rhythm of their dual existence, ranch and town, became second nature. Isaac found he enjoyed the variety, the challenge of managing both aspects of their lives. Beatrice thrived on the social connections the shop provided while still treasuring the peace of their land. One crisp October afternoon, as they rode together along the ridge that had become their special place, James secure in a carrier on Isaac's back, Beatrice reined her horse to a stop. "I have news," she said, her expression both nervous and excited. "We're going to need to expand that townhouse sooner than we planned." Isaac looked at her questioningly, then understanding dawned. "Another baby," Beatrice nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "In the spring. James will be just over 18 months old, close enough to be companions, I hope." Isaac guided his horse alongside hers and reached across to take her hand. "You continue to amaze me, Beatrice Blackburn, just when I think life couldn't possibly get any fuller or more blessed." "We make our own blessings," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "From the hardest beginnings to the most unexpected joys." As they turned for home, the setting sun gilding the autumn landscape in shades of gold, Isaac reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The crushing grief that had once seemed unendurable had gradually transformed, not diminishing but changing shape, making room for new happiness without erasing what came before. Sarah would always be part of him, just as James Zimmerman would always be part of Beatrice. But the life they had built together, this rancher and his bookseller wife, their growing family, their dual existence between wilderness and town was entirely their own creation, forged in the aftermath of loss but not defined by it. The cold they had both known still visited sometimes, in quiet moments or significant anniversaries. But they had learned to face it together, to wrap it in the warmth of their shared understanding, their common experience. And in doing so, they had discovered that the deepest warmth often comes after the coldest nights, not as a replacement, but as the next chapter in a continuing story. As they crested the final hill and their ranch came into view, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney where Harold likely had dinner waiting, Isaac felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become his daily companion. "Look, James," he said to his son, who blinked sleepily from his carrier. "That's home." One of them, Beatrice corrected with a smile. "We're fortunate enough to have two. The places are just buildings," Isaac replied, meeting her eyes with all the love he still sometimes couldn't believe he'd found again. "Home is wherever we're together." And as they rode down toward the waiting lights, their horses walking side by side in the gathering dusk, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky, Isaac knew with absolute certainty that the cold of that terrible winter had finally, completely given way to endless warmth.